Hello, everyone. Welcome into an emergency episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. This is breaking news that Joe Lombardi and Shane Day have been relieved of their duties with the Los Angeles Chargers at the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, passing game coordinator positions. A lot of people just wondered how many heads were going to roll after the Chargers had the third biggest blown lead in playoff history, the biggest blown lead in franchise history, and only put up 3 points in the second half in a pitiful effort against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, now we have our answer. It was not Brandon Staley. It was not Tom Telesco. It was going to be Joe Lombardi, who got thrown under the bus. And so now the Chargers will start an offensive coordinator search and, presumably cast their net as far as they can around the league to find another offensive coordinator to work with Justin Herbert. And it was just clear, I think, to anyone who watched the Jags game and anyone who's watched the Chargers all season, this had to be the move. You cannot continue with Joe Lombardi as Chargers offensive coordinator in any way, even if you were going to keep Staley. That's kind of negotiable to a point. I think he should have been fired, but he won't be. But there was no way that this offense could move forward next year with Joe Lombardi. The lack of an ability to get open receivers, the lack of an ability to really show any offensive creativity. And in the moments where he did show some offensive creativity, it resulted in things like the Michael Bandy end around. So, it was just a really bad performance against Jacksonville. As you can see here, Byron Leftwich, fired by the Buccaneers, was perfectly covered on 60% of his plays for overcalling screens. And Joe Lombardi can get the run game going at all against the Jaguars, and the passing game wasn't that much better. So ultimately, the Chargers were perfectly covered by the opposing defense on 58.14% of their plays, which is a sign of the defensive coordinators knowing what's coming, right? And also being able to quickly, basically destroy every play that the Chargers would call on offense, right? The Chargers we're not disguising everything. Defenses knew everything that was coming, and that just cannot happen when you have Justin Herbert as your quarterback, when you have the offensive firepower that the Chargers have, even without Mike Williams. That game against the Jaguars just should not have happened in the way that it did. And when you need to figure out offensively how to beat Kansas City, when you need to figure out how to beat Buffalo, when you need to figure out how to beat Cincinnati, how to beat Jacksonville, how to beat all these teams, you just cannot be this pitiful on offense. And the Chargers struggled all year, particularly making adjustments coming out of halftime. And it was time for Joe Lombardi to go. So we'll see some stick routes next year. Not as many as we saw this year for sure. But Joe Lombardi now gone as offensive coordinator of the Chargers, as Arjun mentions here. Byron Leftwich, offensive coordinator of the Buccaneers, also gone. So I think that's worth noting just in terms of things that are happening around the league. But I did want to talk about more specifically what this means for the Chargers going forward. Obviously, we're going to have a podcast tomorrow where we talk about all of the offensive coordinator names that you can think of in terms of the names that me, Steven, and Tyler all think would be good going forward for the Chargers. All of us will have some of our favorite names. I don't know if we'll do a top 5 list or just, sort of throw some names out there and start talking about it like it's a, group therapy session, or we could just toss out names. But we will be talking ball obviously tomorrow on the podcast. And per Daniel Popper, if I have this right, Brandon Staley will be talking to the media tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So we'll be going live after that. And Tom Telesco will be speaking to the media 11 a.m. on Thursday. Right. So we will be potting tomorrow after Staley's press conference, presumably that evening, in addition to talking about Joe Lombardi and all the remarks and everything we'll have summed up after that press conference, in addition to talking about offensive coordinator names. I did want to shout out Steven real quickly for a minute, though. If you want to get a head start in terms of looking at coaches around the league and looking at offensive coordinator choices for the Chargers to potentially replace Joe Lombardi, he actually has a video detailing some of his favorite candidates. It's an extensive, half an hour long video. If you want to go check that out, it is privately available on Patreon right now for our subscribers, also YouTube members. So YouTube members and patrons can go check that out. I don't know. Steven doesn't have plans to make this public. So, go check out this video as sort of a sneak preview, if you will. before we talk more in depth about the offense coordinator stuff throughout the next couple of weeks, and specifically on tomorrow's podcast as well. So yeah, go check that out. But this is going to be a big hire for the Chargers. Obviously, this is going to be legacy defining, I think, for Staley and Telesco, right? If you don't get this offensive coordinator hire right, and the Chargers are still struggling next year, it's going to be a big thing to have to answer for. And this is obviously a big decision with Justin Herbert. I think people will say in general that it was an easy decision to fire Joe Lombardi. But one of the reasons I think that this was probably a harder decision for the Chargers to make than people think is obviously this is going to be Justin Herbert's third offensive coordinator now in 4 years. This is going to be his third quarterbacks coach in 4 years as well, right? You go from Pep Hamilton to Shane Day to now a new quarterbacks coach. You go from Shane Steichen to Joe Lombardi to now a new offensive coordinator as well. And Justin Herbert is obviously a quarterback who is not unfamiliar with turnover, right? He had a lot of turnover in terms of his head coaches and his offensive coordinators at Oregon. And so this is a big decision to make to blow it up, so to speak, here in this position. Obviously, Joe Lombardi, I think everyone agrees who watched the Chargers this year, both a fan or neutrals, really he needed to be gone, right? But obviously the human aspect of this is that Justin Herbert likely going to have to learn a completely new system next year. And that's a big deal, right? In terms of, figuring out where this Chargers offense is going to be, what pieces on offense exactly is he going to have? Are the Chargers going to run it back kind of more or less with their current offensive weapons, or will they get something in the draft that changes that, right? So a lot of questions to be answered going forward for sure. I did want to get to this comment, I guess, from Daniel Popper, which, sort of wraps up, I guess, kind of where we are with this, head coaching staff as well as the offensive coordinator decision, right? You had Sean McDermott and Sean McVay, who are two younger head coaches who were hired, who made big, coordinator decisions on the defensive side of the ball, particularly with McVay and firing Wade Phillips, right? McDermott obviously made big calls as well. So, this is going to be, again, a big move for Brandon Staley. Does he kind of move into that head coaching candidate who, or head coach that, recovers after this, offensive bad year, where he gets, a stud OC in there and, starts to kind of grow as a coach with that offensive coordinator? Maybe. But this obviously does have bust potential as well, right? Depending on who the name is and who you go with, there is obviously a chance that this fails too. And if it were to fail, that would spell the end of Brandon Staley, I believe, in Los Angeles. So obviously he's getting another chance here to kind of right the ship. But, we've seen that Brandon Staley has moved on from his mistakes before and righted them. We saw this in a less significant way, but still a very important thing when Darius Swinton got fired as special teams coordinator. Ryan Ficken brought in special teams a lot better this year. You cannot underrate the improvement in special teams under Ficken, right? So, hopefully the same thing happens with the offense, and we're all sitting back a year from now, and hopefully we're still in the divisional round and in the conference championship game. That's the potential if that Brandon Staley nails this offensive coordinator hire ultimately at the end of the day. So hopefully, if, regardless of your feelings on Staley right now, people know how I feel. Hopefully he nails this offensive coordinator hire and, we get to see him continue to develop as a coach, right? That should be the expectation. And if he doesn't, then that is going to be the end of his Chargers tenure, I do believe. I have a favorite choice for offensive coordinator of the Chargers. Pretty simple for me. He is, current head coaching candidate on the market. But for me, there's no, there's going to be a lot of people that kind of, this choice might be controversial to some Chargers fans. But Frank Reich, to me, is the perfect offensive coordinator who understands West Coast concepts, can sort of overhaul this offense, still keep it West Coast, Shanahan based, if you want to call it that way. But obviously, uses triangle reads, uses all these things, mesh in the middle of the field, can sort of keep, what has worked about the Chargers offense the last 3 years while also bringing it to a new level. And obviously people will point to the success he's had with Foles, the success he's had with Wentz, and the winning seasons he had as a head coach and an offensive coordinator with Phillip Rivers and Carson Wentz, and, the success in Indianapolis as a whole. as much as obviously he was fired and replaced by, an ESPN guy and Jeff Saturday. I think that he is, perfect for an offensive coordinator position this go around, and potentially could get a head coaching job after this season as well. So he's personally my favorite choice. I know Arjun has a list. Let me actually pull that up. Steven and Tyler, I'm sure, will be making their lists and who are their favorite offensive coordinator choices as well. But I did want to bring up Arjun's list real quick here. Obviously, friend of the show. After disastrous podcasts, he came on here and talked about everything in the Jags game with us. But he went with Michigan's Matt Weiss, former LSU mind and Panthers offense coordinator Joe Brady, Frank Reich, obviously I just mentioned, Eagles, and Stevens, Utah. When it comes to Brian Johnson potentially getting the offensive coordinator nod, Mike LaFleur recently fired by the Jets, as well as Shea Tierney. So, some names to consider or do your research on as we will go, forward here. Obviously, we're going to do a whole show on offensive coordinators, probably multiple podcasts on offensive coordinators over the next few weeks as the Chargers try to fill the position. It was also big for them to get, this done now, right? Because obviously you're going to have 5 brand new NFL coaching staffs. Washington is also looking for an offensive coordinator. So the Chargers had to make this decision now as opposed to wait on it for, weeks at a time and then figure out what you're going to do with the OC. If you wanted to get one of the top quality guys around the league to work with Justin Herbert, had to be now. And, just as far as Justin Herbert is concerned, I do think there are going to be concerns regarding bringing a new offensive system in, again, for Justin Herbert, who's had a lot of turnover. But the potential, if you get this hire right, is obviously off the charts in terms of where this offense can go. Herbert getting into that true, MVP candidate type of tier like Mahomes and Allen have been in. So, excited to see where the Chargers go from here. We're obviously going to have it all covered on the podcast going forward, and hope that we never see a first or second half, I should say, like the Chargers demonstrated against the Jaguars, where Joe Lombardi just got outcoached and boat raced by Doug Peterson on the other sideline. Hope that we never have to see that in the second half again. That should be the goal of this offensive coordinator hire going forward. But like I said, keep tuned for Brandon Staley's press conference tomorrow, where he'll be talking to the media. Tom Telesco on Thursday. We will be going live tomorrow night to discuss everything from Brandon Staley's press conference, as well as the offensive coordinator news and discuss some names and all of that. So stay tuned, bolt up, and see you guys next time. Leave me, a name in the comments that you like down below, and we'll talk soon.